Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Josh, and today we are doing a very belated road trip report about the epic summer road trip that we took earlier this summer in our Lexus GX. Now, I'm sure it's like September by the time that this is going live, and I apologize for the delay, but the road trip vlog videos went live earlier in August, so I was at least more timely with those. But a lot of you wanted just kind of a final trip report about everything that, all my thoughts about road tripping in the GX and things like that. And there are 5 things that I want to share with you guys here today about our experience road tripping in our GX. So you'll see those 5 things listed here on screen. As always, those will be chapters in the video, so you can use the chapter toggle in the play bar to jump and skip between if you'd like to. So yeah, let's go ahead and dive into the first one, and that is that the GX is just by far and away the most comfortable road trip cruiser ever. And the thing that you have to know about John and I, if you haven't been with me here on the channel for that long or you haven't heard me say, we're car people. We like cars. We have always kind of traded in and out of cars quickly. But that to say, we've done a lot of road trips on a lot of different cars, and by far and away, I think the GX is the most comfortable car that we've ever had the privilege of going on a road trip on. So on our road trip, on this trip, we were doing, 7 to 8 hour sprints from city to city and place to place that we went on our trip. And we didn't just go to 2 or 3 cities. We went to I think 7 or 8 different cities. And so we had, 7 or 8 days on the road where we're doing, these 7 to 8 hour sprints. And so what we do is we got in the car at 8 in the morning, stopped at noon for lunch and to, refill gas, and then did another 4 hours to our destination and got there, in the evening sometime. And on those days, on the days that we were doing that kind of driving, not once did I ever hate my life because I was spending 7 hours in the car. And that for me is a big thing, because there have been a lot of trips that we've done where by the time you are, halfway to your destination, right? So maybe 4 hours into the trip, you're just done. And if you could just get on a plane and fly there instead, you would. And not once in the GX did I ever feel that way. And in fact, when we were 4 hours into our trip, I didn't want to get out and, stretch my legs and get lunch. I wanted to just kind of, push on through and enjoy the rest of the drive, because it was so much fun to be in the GX. And that was regardless of whether I was, I was driving or whether I was the passenger. I love driving the GX. And one of the very first things I noticed, the first long driving day that we had, I didn't use cruise control on the GX once. Not once on the entire trip. And we did 4,000 miles of, total driving. Now, in part because cruise control on the GX is not great. It's the first generation TSS or LSS Plus system, which is not great. But I really love the way the GX drives. That's not going to be the case for everyone. It's an old school truck. The steering is heavy. It wanders around the road. But that's the kind of car I love. I love to drive a big, comfy, old school truck on the open highway. And the GX was such a pleasure to drive that I would look forward to getting into the driver's seat and, taking the GX out on the open road, because it was such a pleasure. One of the reasons for that is, of course, the GX460 came standard with KDSS. So in the GX460, because you have a hydraulic, it's ultimately sway bars that can disconnect and reconnect based on the kind of terrain you're on. So on-road, they lock into place and you get 0 body roll. It's the most incredible thing to drive such a big, hulking truck and have no body roll whatsoever. And then there's just kind of all the suspension tuning and perfecting that Lexus has done over the years with the GX460. So when you're driving down the road in that car, 1, you don't have body roll. 2, it's a really agile car to drive. And the way that the standard suspension, it's like riding on a cloud, but at the same time, you never feel disconnected from the road. I always know exactly where my wheels are. I can feel little undulations, but it's not intrusive in any way. I just love the way it drives, and it's so pleasant and so pleasurable. I get so much pleasure from driving my GX that even 7 to 8 hour stretches on the road in the car ain't no thing. And then on top of that, the final thing I want to mention here, because I've gotten a lot of questions about this, is road noise and wind noise and just kind of noise levels in the car on long open stretches of road. And I measured, now this is not scientific, I didn't use like, one of those little devices to properly measure noise, but I did it on my Apple Watch. And at 80 miles an hour on a rather ragged road, my Apple Watch measured a mere 60 decibels of noise in the cabin. Absolutely incredible. Loved every minute of it. Could not imagine a better car, truck, whatever, to road trip in. And yeah. Okay, second thing I want to say that really kind of stood out to me on our road trip was the GX460 is like the perfect size for us. Now, let me kind of give you some context into what I mean by that. So the thing that I really like about the GX is its size. The thing about the GX is 460 is if you look at it sitting in a parking lot or in your driveway, it looks huge. Like, because it's so tall, because it's so blocky, it just looks huge. But the thing is, when you look at the measurements on paper, they're actually really small in terms of footprint. And for us, the GX460 is a perfect size because we don't need a giant back seat and a giant cargo area. And for us, the GX is big enough to be comfortable, but small enough to be agile. And that for me is another thing I love about my GX is it's way smaller than a Highlander, way smaller than like a Grand Highlander or TX. The thing to know about the new GX550, okay, it was crazy to me. When I saw it in person the first time, I was like, this thing looks and feels huge. Maybe it's not. Maybe it just looks that way because of the way it's designed. But then when I looked at the measurements on paper, the new Land Cruiser and GX, which are the same car, are 4 inches wider and 5 inches longer than my GX. And not only does that make for a much larger footprint, but it totally changes the way a car drives. I mean, that is basically almost going up an entire class size, going from the GX460 to the GX550 or the new Land Cruiser 250. That's crazy, and that makes a huge difference in terms of drivability and just kind of the way they handle and all this sort of thing. They're not agile the same way that the 5th gen 4Runner and the Lexus GX are. And then the other thing about the size that I really like about my GX460 and like the 4th gen V8 4Runner is having a V8 in a mid-size body and frame SUV, like that is the perfect combination. Now, obviously today that doesn't exist because every car today is going to like a Turbo 4, a Turbo 6 or whatever. V8s are pretty much an endangered species, limited to like supercars at this point. But having a mid-size body and frame SUV, and truly mid-size, like the size of the GX460 with a V8, absolute perfection. Now, I will say, if you have kids or you have like a family of 4, okay, and you're road tripping, the GX might be a little small for you, just depending on how much room you all like to have. In that case, yes, look at, QX80 or Chevy Tahoe or GMC Yukon or Cadillac Escalade or whatever, because I don't know personally if we had 2 kids, for example, or we were carrying around, we were road tripping with another couple or something, I would maybe want something a little bit bigger. But at least for us, for the 2 of us on the road, perfect size. Okay, next up, this kind of builds on the V8 body on frame kind of point. There is nothing that feels like an old school V8 Toyota SUV. Or even a V6 Toyota SUV, like body on frame SUV. I have not yet come across a car, even like the new Land Cruiser, new GX, new Sequoia, new Tacoma. I have not come across any new Toyota vehicle or any vehicle that has the same tank-like feeling that I get in my GX460 and that you would get in like an older Land Cruiser, whether 100 or 200 series, or an older 4Runner. And it's impossible to describe. Okay, so you'll know what I mean though if you own one of these or if you've ever driven one of these. Like even a V8 Tahoe drives very differently than a V8, Toyota SUV. There's just something about old school Toyota SUVs with those big, overbuilt, understressed, naturally aspirated engines that created such an amazing feeling out on the road. Something that John said, and I wrote it down because when he said it, I was like, oh, I got to mention that at some point. John said, I think we were in Moab driving up to Salt Lake City or somewhere around the parks. He goes, nothing feels like this V8. He goes, this V8 feels like it can take on anything we throw at it. Like we didn't do any kind of mountain adventuring, like, you know, going up the side of a mountain or anything. But if we had wanted to, like doing the Schaefer Trail at Canyonlands National Park, or, you know, off-roading somewhere in the desert or in the mountains in Colorado or whatever, like we could have done that and the GX would have done just fine. And that is the feeling that you used to be able to get in a lot of Toyota cars that I just don't think that you get anymore. One other thing about the V8 that I was really impressed by is if you've ever gone to Colorado or Utah, you'll know what I mean when I say that your car is really down on power in those places, because at altitude, and you know, Utah's anywhere from like 6,000 to 8,000 feet. Colorado and in Rocky Mountain National Park, I mean, we were at 12,000 feet. And when you go up there in something like the last time we did Rocky Mountain National Park, we had an Outback, a Subaru Outback with the flat six boxer engine. So it was a naturally aspirated 6-cylinder, but not a V6, a flat six or H6. That car was really down on power, and that was a pretty powerful car. It felt really great on the road here in Texas or whatever. But when we got up to Colorado, I mean, you'd have your foot full down, and it'd feel like you were driving a Mitsubishi Mirage. If you've ever driven one of those, you know what I mean. In the GX though, even at the 12,000 feet, yeah, it was down on power, and it didn't feel, you know, we weren't going to win any drag races at altitude, but even there, I never wanted for more power. There's just nothing like an overbuilt, understressed engine like what you used to be able to get in Toyota trucks with a big V8 or even a V6. Okay, fourth takeaway thing I want to mention is actually something I didn't ever realize until we were on this trip, and I realized it because of the places we were going. And that is that this GX is at home both in the city and in the country. And what I mean by that is on our trip, we did everything from the desert, like we were in Moab, which is so not, you know, urban and fancy, and you know that, like, it's not a country club. It's a desert, national parks, mountains, dust everywhere. You know, the car got filthy and dirty. But we also did Park City in Utah. We stayed at the St. Regis. We did downtown or Cherry Creek in Denver. Like, we were in, you know, nice hotels, urban areas. And something that was really interesting to me about the GX, kind of doing our entire trip and going to all those different kinds of places, was that I've never found a car that was so at home in both of those extremes. So, like when we were in Moab, for example, everything in Moab is a truck or a Subaru, and Subarus are basically trucks. But you know what I mean? Like, you know, you'd be parked next to a Land Rover Discovery, and you'd be parked next to a Subaru Outback that's lifted and it's got a roof box on the top, or you'd be next to an FJ Cruiser or something. And the GX never felt out of place, even though it is a little bit more of a posh kind of, you know, pavement princess type car with all its chrome and the fancy bits and the really nice interior. When the GX gets dusty, it looks like any other truck out there. And I love that. You know, I love that about it. So in Moab, the car was filthy, dusty as can be, you know, all that kind of thing. And it blended right in with all the 4Runners and all the Land Cruisers and all the Land Rovers and the Subarus and the stuff. But then we washed it and, you know, and made our way up to Salt Lake City, and it was equally at home amongst the Range Rovers and the Grand Wagoneers and, you know, all the supercars and sports cars that you get in, you know, the very wealthy cities. And, you know, you can drive the GX up to the valet at a really nice hotel, and they don't kind of look at it and go, ew, you know what I mean? So I was really impressed and really happy with just kind of the way that the GX can handle being in any kind of situation, any kind of environment. And that goes back to, you know, it can do off-roading without breaking a sweat. But it's also so civilized, so urbane, and just so elegant that you drive up to the St. Regis 5-star hotel amongst the Maybachs, amongst the Lamborghinis and the Ferraris and everything, and no one looks at it like it's out of place. And the thing that was really interesting is, as I started to really think about this, like, what other cars out there are there that can so easily step into both worlds, or have a foot in both worlds, if you will? There's not really many, because this is my great frustration with SUVs today. Automakers think, because a lot of YouTube journalists and, you know, people on social media say it, that if you buy an SUV, you want it to be rugged and tough and macho, and they put a giant penis on the hood if they could without being vulgar. Like, people seem to want cars that exude their macho-ness, and I don't have a fragile sense of masculinity. I'm the first person who will tell you I'm not the biggest man on the planet. Like, I don't care about any of that shit. The problem is every SUV today is, basically designed for small penis syndrome. I have to exude my masculinity through my SUV, and it's got to be butch and boxy and cladded all over the place, and roof box and, a roof basket and stuff like this. And the problem with that is now we don't have any elegant SUVs. I mean, QX80 and Escalade are on the more elegant side, but those are not at home at the in the desert on the trails where the GX is. I just think that that's a rarity amongst cars today. All right, and finally, fifth and final thing about our road trip that I wanted to report to y'all is the fuel economy, and we have to talk about this because we have to, and because John is so obsessed with calculating all the numbers. John is so funny. I love him to pieces. He looks at. I'm the kind of person, I'll go, when the gauge is getting low, I go put gas in it, and then I drive around until it needs gas again. John monitors fuel economy and everything, like, religiously in our cars. I mean, he's got his trip meters all set up in the Camry, and it's funny because the Camry is not a fuel-efficient car, and I'm like, why do you worry about the fuel economy in that? We know it's not great. It's a big, naturally aspirated V6. You're not going to get great fuel economy. He goes, I still want to know. So he does. And so he tracked all of our fuel economy, every gallon, every mile, every fill up, down to the numbers. And here are the numbers. Okay, so here are the numbers. And I have to be honest right up front. I'm not entirely sure if this is exactly right, because I think the total miles driven sounds low for everything we did. But regardless, this is John's math, so we're going to go with it. We did he tracked a total of 3,261 miles driven. Average cost per gallon of gas on our trip was $3.71. That brought us to a total of $690.27 total fuel cost. And per this calculation, we used a total of 172.9 gallons, so 173 gallons of gas. And over the course of this trip, or at least the 3,261 miles we did track, we did an average of 18.87 average MPG, which is not bad, really, all things considered, for the GX. Okay, now you might see all that and go, that's terrible. That being said, I don't actually think that that's that bad for the GX. It's bad in general, but here's the thing. We obviously did do a lot of highway driving on our trip, but there were so many, while we were at our destinations along the way, we were doing, we were crawling at like 10 miles an hour through the national parks, or we were sitting, in city traffic in Denver and Salt Lake City, or, just kind of like creeping and crawling through the canyons, or not the canyons, but the mountain passes in Park City and all this kind of thing. And basically the first half of our trip, maybe even more than that, was all climbing because, we live in Texas where the altitude is like 600 feet. And by the time, our highest altitude was 12,000 feet in Colorado. And so really up until we got to Denver, we were going up and up and up and up and up. And that's never going to be good for your fuel economy. It's never going to get you the kind of fuel economy if you were just doing, flat land driving, or even kind of descending, right? Where you can kind of coast more often than not. Now, the other reason that the other contributing factor to that MPG is there was a mix of John's highway driving and mine evened out. And what I mean by that is when John is doing, long road tripping like what we did, he is the one who will stay pretty close to the speed limit in the right lane. And again, because he's so obsessed over fuel economy, he's looking all the time, am I driving as efficiently as I can? So when John was doing highway driving, he was consistently getting like 21, 22, 23 even on the highway. And that's pretty good for the 4.6 liter naturally aspirated V8 that doesn't have cylinder deactivation, doesn't run on the Atkinson cycle, really doesn't have any kind of technology to aid in efficiency. Now, the reason our total cumulative MPG was not higher was because of my highway driving. So when I'm on the highway, especially doing the kind of driving that we were doing in this trip. John's objective is fuel economy, right? He wants to get every last, mile to the gallon that he can out of a gas tank, regardless of what car we're in. My driving style, I want to get to where we're going as fast as I can. Not because I don't enjoy it, but because I don't want to drag out, a drive that could be 4 hours into 6 hours just to save some on fuel economy. Like, I want to get where I'm going in a reasonable amount of time. So when I'm doing that kind of long open road straight shot highway outside of the cities and things like that, I'm doing 95 miles an hour. Hate on me all you want for that. I don't care. If I come upon a car that's going like 80 miles an hour, I will pass them because I want to get to where I'm going. And the thing about the GX is, here's another thing about that V8. It can do that, no problem. It's like 95, whatever. Like, let's go. Buckle in. And it does it. It's so smooth, so quiet, so refined. Sometimes, I'll be honest, sometimes I didn't even realize I was going as fast as I was because the car is such a serene place. And it's like, how can a big metal box flying through the air at 95 miles an hour be this quiet and this comfortable inside? Like, I looked down at my speedometer and it was like 105, and I was like, holy, okay, gotta slow it down a little bit. But anyway, that to say, when you're doing 95 miles an hour on the highway with a big V8, it's not being efficient. And so John's, my MPG on the highway was more like 15 to like 17. And so John's 21, 22 averaged it out, back to a reasonable number, somewhere in the middle of like 16 to 17 MPG. The other thing I want to mention, because I've owned a 4Runner in the past, and I'm very familiar with the 1GR FE 6 and the antiquated AF 5-speed automatic in the 4Runner, we have road tripped the 4Runner, and I didn't like it nearly as much. And one big thing that you do notice in the GX versus the 4Runner, the power output is similar. GX has more power, but it doesn't feel, that much faster on the road. The big difference between the GX and the 4Runner is that 6th gear. Not only does that give you way better fuel economy on the highway than the 4Runner's 5th gear, but I don't find that the GX hunts gears the same way that the 4Runner will. So in the 4Runner, and if you've ever driven one of these, you'll know exactly what I mean. When you're sitting there driving, okay, you'll feel the car going in between 4th and 5th and 4th and 5th. You put your foot down to get more power because the car is slowing down. It's going to downshift into 4th. And then it'll upshift into 5th. Back down into 4th. Up into 5th. Sometimes if you really need to get up to speed or get around, it might even drop it down into 3rd gear, and then it starts screaming. And so I find that the GX, even though it will, drop down into 5th gear sometimes or 4th gear, it's not nearly as jarring and bothersome as the 5-speed automatic and the 4Runner. And again, that's another thing that makes the GX such a great road trip car, even versus its very near cousin, the 4Runner, is it just has better on-road manners, not just its ride quality and NVH, but also the transmission and the engine in the GX are way better suited to long-distance on-road driving than the 4Runners. And finally, if you caught my little note in the chapter listings at the beginning of the video, I have a bonus 6th takeaway from you because I just got out of the all-new 2024 Toyota Land Cruiser, which is going to be the closest thing in terms of price to the GX460 on the market today. And we'll talk way more about the new Land Cruiser in the full review, which will drop next Friday, so definitely come on back for that. But what I'm going to tell you here and now is that everything that we just covered about my GX460, everything that I love so much about it, is kind of the opposite, like polar opposite, in the new Land Cruiser. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that ahead of next week's video. So you know how earlier on I told you that John said that the 1UR FE V8 in the GX felt like it could go anywhere and do anything. Well, the way he described the 2.4 liter iForce Max inline 4-cylinder turbo hybrid in the new Land Cruiser is that it feels like driving a 10-year-old car that hadn't been maintained properly. And I know that that sounds extreme and it sounds harsh, but I actually agree with that. It's just not a great driving experience. It's lurchy and it's jerky. And what you're seeing on screen here is a recording of the vibrations at idle in this Land Cruiser as measured by the 3-axis gyro in my phone. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the powertrain is not dependable or durable, but it leads to the perception that this thing is not going to last for the kind of driving that most people want to do in a Land Cruiser. On top of that, and as many of you have asked about with the Land Cruiser, on the fuel economy note, I actually didn't end up doing much better with the turbo hybrid 4-cylinder than I do with my 1UR FE naturally aspirated 4.6 liter V8. So quite literally half the displacement and half the cylinders. And yet, under my control, both of them end up doing around 16 to 17 in the city and about 20 to 21 on the highway. And both of them require premium fuel. And with how janky and high-strung the Land Cruiser's engine is, there is no way I'd want a chance putting regular fuel in there. Like, it is janky enough with premium fuel. And finally, as it pertains to road tripping, the last really annoying thing about the new Land Cruiser is, as many of you know and as many of you had asked me about, the Land Cruiser's fuel tank is considerably smaller than what's in the GX460 and a 5th gen 4Runner. It's got an 18-gallon fuel tank. And that wouldn't be an issue if the Land Cruiser had significantly better fuel economy, so it could go farther on less gas. But since it doesn't, and it's getting the same amount of the same fuel economy as my GX460, your range in the Land Cruiser is about 100 miles shorter than what it is in a GX460. So in the Land Cruiser, at full, based on 20 MPG, the trip computer was showing me a range of 290 miles. Now, I suspect if you were doing all highway driving, you could maybe get that MPG number up to maybe 22, though again, that's the same as the GX460. But still, that means that you would have a hypothetical range of about 300 to maybe 325 miles of range. That's not great, especially for a road trip car. And if you were to average a speed of 75 miles an hour, that means you're stopping to fill up every 3 hours, if not even, less time than that, because you don't want to wait till your car hits zero to fill up. On a road trip, you want to get gas when you see a gas station and you're getting low. You don't want to run out of gas in the middle of nowhere. So come on back next week for the full Land Cruiser video. And in the meantime, let's go ahead and wrap up this video. So yeah, I think that's about it. That's our trip. We had an amazing time. Thank you all for any of you who came along on the entire road trip vlog, the 2.5 hours or whatever nonsense I put out there, split between the 2 road trip videos. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you all had fun. So many of you really seem to enjoy it. They didn't get many views, and I didn't expect them to get many views, and I don't do YouTube for the views as well. I do it because this is fun for me and I love the community here. I work a full-time job. I make enough money from my job that I can do YouTube for fun, which is a very privileged position to be in. I understand that. But anyway, I really appreciate it. This is so much fun. And so I think, if we go places in the future where we're going to do kind of a fun trip, I'll probably bring you all along, and whether it's our car or a rental car, I'm sure it'll be fun. And having you guys along, by the way, because I travel so much and so often I'm like I am right now by myself, these trips can get kind of lonely, and so having you guys along for the ride, it's so nice to kind of get to talk to you guys on these trips. So I appreciate the 2 or 3 of you that watch these videos of mine. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope this was helpful. I hope this answered all the questions that you guys had. A lot of my content I get accused of being very biased toward the GX, and you know what? I am, and I'm not going to apologize for that because I love it. But understand that my opinions are just that. They're opinions. I'd never say what I'm saying is fact, and everyone is going to have different preferences. If you don't like the GX460, don't watch my videos. That's all there is to it. And I understand that there are 1,000,002 valid reasons to hate the GX460 too. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Questions and comments, leave them downstairs or email me at the email that you see here on screen. I really appreciate you watching. I will see you in the next one, which will probably be this trip that we're on right now. Have a great one and take care.